The Travel Transformation Podcast is proud to be partnered with Give the Goodness Global, an amazing global outreach project helping families in need all over Southeast Asia and beyond. Please check them out at Instagram.com/Give the Goodness Global today. And now on to the podcast episode.
Welcome to the Travel Transformation Podcast, where we talk all things travel and all things transformation, exploring the life-changing potential of solo travel, intentional travel, and location-independent working. Whether you're an aspiring digital nomad or simply wish to boost your confidence through epic travel experiences, I'm here to motivate and inspire you to go after all your wildest dreams. I'm Jessica Grace Coleman, author, certified travel coach, founder of the Travel Transformation Company, and your host for the Travel Transformation Podcast. Travel changed my life. Now let's change yours. You ready? Let's go. Welcome to the Travel Transformation Podcast, where we talk all things travel and all things transformation. My name is Jessica Grace Coleman and I'm your host, and today I'm talking to author Leigh Lincoln. Leigh has spent the better part of her last 30 years involved in homeless and poverty advocacy. Her novel, Road Home, was born out of this work. She wanted to make people think about their lives and how they live, but most importantly, about how they treat others and how they want to be treated. Her other novels, Road to Freedom, Finding the Real Road, and The Road West, look at how our lives don't always follow the path we choose, but yet, somehow, we must pick up the broken pieces and move on. How we grow and where our strength comes from is what's most important. She loves to inspire others to find their voice, explore the world, and never be left out of the conversation. Her passion lies in crafting inspiring novels that impact readers on a deep, emotional level. Through her storytelling, she aims to inspire, uplift, and provoke thoughtful conversations. In this episode, we discuss her book series and how she accidentally wrote her first book, the way she's incorporated her travels into the stories she writes, and how she uses her platform as an author to help the homeless. Now, I love talking about all things travel and all things writing, so let's get straight to the interview. Hi, Leigh. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I am doing great. How about you?
Great. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Okay, so just to begin with, please can you give me and our listeners a bit of background information about you, where you're from, what you do, and a little bit about your story so far?
So I am Leigh Lincoln, and I am from the United States. I live in the South now, but I originally am from out West, and I am the author of 4 inspirational novels.
Amazing. And I can see them on your screen, so that's really cool. And it's the Broken Road series. Can you tell me about this? What are the books in the series and what are they about?
So the first book, Road Home, is about a homeless hitchhiker who kind of wanders all over the United States. And then she hits a point where she needs to share her story and figure out where she went wrong. And that's each book has a character who hits a point where they need to share the story and figure out what goes wrong. So that's kind of the theme of each book. But Road to Freedom is about a man who's dying of cancer, and he takes his new bride to Cuba and Spain, where he's lived before, and then he shares his story. Then Finding the Real Road is about a woman with a really bad marriage, and so she travels from out west to down south and shares her story about where she went wrong and why it took her so long to get the divorce that she really badly needed. And then my final one, The Road West, is about an elderly woman who had a moment of indiscretion in her youth where she almost had an affair. And now a stranger knocks on her door and gets her to share her story. So you see Cuba and Spain, Italy, and New York in that one. So all of them have various different places because every character has both a physical, emotional, and spiritual journey that they're on.
Wow, great. That sounds amazing. So I'm going to ask about the places in a bit. But can you tell me what made you want to be an author in the first place? Have you always been into reading and writing?
I've always been into reading. I read a ton. I read 300 to 500 books a year. I binge read, not binge watch. I'm one of those people, yeah. But my first book, Road Home, I wrote purely by accident. I didn't mean to write a book. I was journaling out my frustrations because people weren't listening to me. And then I accidentally wrote a book. So that was a happy accident.
Okay, I've never heard anyone say they accidentally wrote a book, so that's amazing. Oh, wow, you read a lot. I mean, I love reading too, but I mean, 300 to 500 books a year, that's incredible. I know this is like the worst question ever, but do you have a favorite book or a favorite author or several favorite books or any recommendations you want to give?
Well, I really like the old school books. like Hemingway and Steinbeck. I'm really old school. It might be my age, but maybe because they're so literary and so in depth, which a lot of books now are kind of fluffy. And so that may just be my personal preference, but I really like some of those old school books. And of course, Hemingway has attracted me because of some of the places he writes about Spain and Cuba. Hey, connection here. You get the connection. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because you say that you do all the research for your novels in person. So that means traveling to places like Cuba, Spain, and all over America. So do you like traveling anyway? Have you always been traveling? And if you're doing it as research for a novel, how do you approach a trip? Do you have specific things you do? Do you take notes or do you just go and then use it in your books afterwards?
What I do is I just go and let myself get immersed in somewhere and just really get to understand where I am. So, for example, when I was in the Gran Canaries in Spain, I took a Wawa, which is a bus, high up into the mountains, into this little town called Terror. And I found this little festival, local festival. They had people in costume doing their native dances and their native music, and they had all the local foods and all this beautiful artwork for sale. And I just immersed myself in the local culture for a day. And it was just such a beautiful, beautiful experience that when I wrote my book, Road to Freedom, I just felt it had to be included. So I put my characters into that situation. And so I wrote all about this whole experience of the Wawa and everything. So you actually feel like you are there in this whole crazy experience that I myself have, because I want my readers to go on the same journeys that I've been on. So I approach research very differently. I have an idea of where I want my characters to go, and then I go there and I find experiences. So I don't go looking for an experience, I go find an experience. And sometimes I do need very specific information. Like I was looking for very specific information about, some of the things that happened during Castro's reign and during Franco's reign. So sometimes I need some very specific information, but sometimes I just want the ambiance of what's going on around. And sometimes getting lost is just a beautiful, beautiful thing. I love just getting lost and just talking to the locals and just getting to know them and getting to know what makes them tick and what they love about wherever they live.
And I was going to ask you about that because you mentioned a time you got lost in Rome, which led to something. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I got lost in Rome. One time I got lost in Rome, ended up in this little back alley. It was a dead end alley and I was going to have to turn around, but there was a bunch of little school kids in the alley. And they said, oh, what are you looking for? Because clearly you've made a wrong turn, right? So we were talking to these kids. And so they were like, well, as long as you're here, just join our group for a little bit because we're about to go in and see this. And it's close to the public, but you can just pretend you're with us and go in here. And we're like, okay, don't know what you're talking about, but, because I don't speak Italian. Their English wasn't great because, right, they're kids, right? So we went in and it was an archaeology site. They were renovating what had at one point been a church, but it had been turned into a school and later a private home. And so then they were slowly unraveling all the layers of centuries of work that had been done on this building to bring it back to the church that it originally was. So as the archaeologists were peeling back the layers, you could see all the different things that had gone on. And this was closed to the public. They were letting the kids see it because of the history aspect of it, right? And these were Italian kids, right, in Rome. And we got to see this as Americans, even though we shouldn't have, all because I got lost. So yeah, it was absolutely amazing them talking about that, the whole history of that particular little neighborhood in Rome. And because of course they were trying to explain this to school kids, right? So I got to see something and hear something that very few will ever get to see and hear and experience, all because I was willing to just throw out the map and get lost. It was beautiful and amazing and just so rare and unique. And I think this is one of the problems with Americans. Americans are really stuck on, we have to be part of a group. We have to follow the map. And I'm not like that at all. I refuse to be one of those that's stuck looking at a map. And I see them all the time when I go to Europe. I see them. They're everywhere. They're on every corner. I've got my map. Where am I? And
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I love how you stumbled upon that. That's a great thing to stumble upon. And yeah, the map thing as well. I love going to a place. I mean, I always have a list of things I want to visit so I don't miss out. But then I love just sort of wandering around on my own and seeing where I end up, because you're right. Like, there's so many places that I wouldn't even know existed because they're not listed on the top 10 things to do on TripAdvisor or whatever, or like beautiful buildings that I would never have seen, or cute little cafes or something that you stumble upon. So I love doing that. So I love that story. Has that made it into any of your books, the archaeological stuff?
that hasn't yet. But the other thing that I accidentally found when I got lost in Rome did, another little alley. I was wandering down by accident. I keep finding these weird little alleys. I'm just saying. I was walking down this alley, and all of a sudden the church bells started to ring in Rome. And the way the alley was lined with stones, the bells just crescendoed off the alley. And it was just this moment where just literally you could hear the bells in your soul, the way it was ringing. It was just this beautiful, beautiful moment. And it's really hard to describe. And I described it as well as I could in my book, The Road West, because it's just this beautiful moment of just, you're just completely surrounded by those bells chiming because of the way they echoed off the walls. And it was just absolutely amazing. And after it was over, I wondered how many people have heard this, throughout the centuries, throughout history. Because if you happen to be walking down that alley at the right moment in time, this is what you hear. It just crescendoed off those walls. It was so beautiful. And yeah, bells can be really loud when you're standing right next to them. It was just so magical the way it echoed. And I was the only one just standing. Everybody else in the alley just kept going about their business, right? Because this was a daily thing for them. This was like, oh, no big deal. This is my town. Yeah, I need to get to work, right? But for me, I just stopped and I just listened because it was just so beautiful. And this is another thing that most Americans are going to miss because A, they're probably not going to be going down some sketchy alley anyways, right? And B, alleys aren't ever on a map. It was haunting. It was so beautiful. It was just absolutely amazing. And that did make it into The Road West because there was a moment in that book where it just fit so perfectly with the character that I was like, oh, I can totally use this.
That's amazing. I love that. I talk about magical movie moments a lot in my content that you often get when you're traveling. And that is just a perfect example of it as well. Like, you can just imagine that it's, you're in a scene in a movie and this magical thing happens and, no one else is paying attention to it, but you actually just stop and be in the moment and be present and take it in. And I can just imagine it the way you were describing it. So I'm glad that made it into your book. That's really cool. Now, you said you wrote the first book by accident, but for the other books, do you have like a process? Do you use any kind of software? Do you like write so many words a day, or do you like go on sprints, or like how do you do it?
I try to write between 3,000 and 8,000 words a day. Sometimes I hit as many as 10. But part of the reason I do so many, because that sounds like I can write a book like in 5 days, right? Is because I throw spaghetti at a wall and see what sticks. So for me to write a 60,000 word book, that means I'm actually writing like 300,000 words because half of what I write is absolute garbage. And a third of what I write is sort of okay, but probably is going to get thrown out in the end. And then there's this little nugget in there that my editor's like, okay, we can clean this up a bit and tweak it and make this great.
Yeah, I totally relate to that because I'm a writer as well. And I do the same thing. I always think like, it doesn't matter. It's the first draft. It doesn't matter if it's rubbish. Most first drafts are just get it on the paper, because the worst thing is looking at a blank page and just not being able to start. So even if you're starting with absolute rubbish, just get it down there. You can edit later. It's all like the right drunk edit sober as well. Like, it doesn't matter how bad it is the first time. You can sort it out afterwards. So definitely.
Yes. So, and a lot of people, when they hear my word count, they're like, wait, you only do a book a year. How do you do that when your word count's that high? And I'm like, yeah, because you're not understanding how much garbage is on the page.
Yeah. How much time it takes to edit it down to something that makes sense.
Yeah, that to get it down to that tiny little nugget that's in the middle of all the craziness. Yes, we're all good. Never mind.
Definitely relating hard with that. Now, we mentioned travel a bit there. Have you always been into travel? Have you always been traveling?
Yeah, when I was a kid, my parents traveled a ton. I didn't travel quite as much when I was a single mother, but it was pretty limited. And now that I'm an empty nester and my kid is on his own again, I'm just having so much fun just wandering the world and just getting out there and living my life. Not that I am saying it was bad being a mother, but I'm just saying I have way less responsibilities now. And so I can just get out there and just do whatever I want. And it's just so freeing and just so fun. There's something about travel. And I think this is another thing a lot of Americans miss. I've read somewhere that less than 20% of Americans even have a passport.
I've heard, similar statistics.
Yeah. And so I think we really need more of us to just get out there and wander the world. There's so much to see and so much to do. And yeah, it's great that I've got a few people like reading my books and going, oh, I would love to someday visit blah, blah. But don't just think about it, go do it, and I'm having the time of my life. I've been to Greece, which so far that hasn't made it into a book, but it totally needs to. But yeah, I've been all over and I just love it. But even as a kid, I traveled a lot. I was a foreign exchange student in Germany as a kid and wandered around Canada and all over the United States with my parents. So I've just always loved to travel. It's just always kind of been my thing. So
Nice. And how was the foreign exchange then? How old were you and where in Germany did you go?
I went to a small town outside of Hamburg and I loved it. The family was amazing and it was a wonderful experience. And that's another thing I think every kid should do is be a foreign exchange student when they're in high school. I was in high school. I do think every kid should have that experience, even if it's just the summer program, spend a couple months over there with family. Get to see that we're all people, we're all the same. Doesn't matter what side of the planet you're on. Like I said, the family I stayed with, they were absolutely beautiful and amazing. And I had so much fun. And of course, that was when Germany was two countries. And so they actually got to take me to East Germany to visit their family. And we had to get special permission, of course, because I was an American. And it was a real eye opener for me as an American back then. And there's a whole lot of issues going on. If you start young, getting to see some of these experiences versus going as an adult. But I know I've talked to other people my age who are just amazed how often I go to Europe and they're like, oh, you're older, you should be slowing down. And I'm like, but why? Even at this age, we should be traveling. I don't believe that there's any time to stop traveling, I guess I should be saying. We need to start young and just keep going because there's something about travel that just kind of lights up your soul and makes you just be a different person. And you see things that you can incorporate into your life. Like Americans don't slow down, we don't sit and enjoy a meal. As where you go to Spain and they'll sit and they'll people watch sitting on a patio after dinner for like 4 hours and nobody looks twice, if you're doing that at a restaurant. You do that in America, they're going to be telling you to leave the restaurant after a half an hour, right? We have very different cultures and we need to learn these things and we need to see how other people are and not just think my little corner of the universe is the only place that's perfect.
I totally agree with all of that. And what you mentioned about Spain made me laugh because I've been to Spain the past couple of springs and it's exactly the same. I'm so used to rushing around to hardly taking any time to have dinner. And there you would just sit and have, like, I was in a co-living, we'd have family dinners and our dinners would just be like 4 hours, 5 hours. Everyone would be drinking wine, just talking, just chilling. And I'd just be going like, I've got work to do. I really shouldn't just be sitting here. But then you're like, well, why not? Like, this is great. And it just, shows you that there are different ways of doing things.
Oh, yeah. And Spain is one of my favorite countries for that reason. They have such a relaxed lifestyle. I mean, shops close for a couple of hours in the middle of the afternoon everywhere. And they have these huge, relaxing dinners. And if you're by yourself or you're in a small group, they'll just pull you over to the table next to you and draw you into the conversation. Oh, no, there's only 2 of you. Oh, no, come over with us. That's too small. You need to be part of this big group. what's going on in your life? They don't believe in, they have this huge different culture, and it's loud and it's wonderful and it's community. And even if you're not part of their community, that doesn't matter. And that's one of the things I love about Spain is everyone's family. And whether you're family or not, doesn't even really matter.
Yeah, totally agree. That's great. So you mentioned before about how everyone should do a foreign exchange if they can. And I think that's so true. Like if you can either go on an exchange or like you say, like a summer program or something when you're a teenager, that just sows the seed for like the travel bug, and like it will hit you and you will want to keep doing it. And like you say, it just shows you what other people in the world are like and that they're so similar to you. And also it shows you what you're sort of capable of if you don't ever think, oh, I could solo travel to this country or something. Like if you go on exchange or something, you're like, actually, it's not too bad. Like I could do this. And it shows you how accessible travel actually is when you start thinking about it. So I love that. You mentioned you went to Cuba, which I've never been to. So can you tell me a bit about Cuba, what you liked about it?
It's very different. It depends on where you go, because like Havana, they try really hard to keep certain areas okay for tourists, but the country itself is extremely impoverished. And so everyday people have nothing. I know quite a bit of Cuban immigrants for various reasons, and they try to bring stuff to Cuba all the time so that their family has things, because otherwise they'd have nothing. So it really kind of depends on where you go in Cuba. But Cuba is very different. And there are people in Cuba that literally their only source of income is pickpocketing from tourists. So you have to be really careful where you are at all times and be presently aware of what's going on around you. I'm not saying it's unsafe, but I am saying it's because of the government situation there. You do need to make sure you stay with a group or with someone who is from that country that you trust because of the situation. There are a lot of restrictions, and it is what it is. And I think it will never change because that government just doesn't seem to want to let go of that country, unfortunately, which is a real shame because there are some absolutely amazingly beautiful people in Cuba who are just lovely. And they have some of the most beautiful beaches in the world, like the black sand beaches. And it's an amazing place. Unfortunately, because of the situation that the government has created, it's sad. And it is what it is. And you as a tourist cannot change it. But one thing I do caution people is realize that when you're going as a tourist, you are putting money into the hands of the government, not into the hands of the people.
Yeah, that's something to be aware of, definitely. And Cuba made it into one of your books, did you say?
It has made it into two. Road to Freedom, just mentioned Cuba, as well as Road West. Both of them discuss Cuba before Castro and a little bit about trying to defect, because both of them have characters who defect Cuba. I have lots of friends that live here in the United States that are from Cuba. Some of them defected. Some of them were able to get out through other means. I know lots of Cuban immigrants. That is a very difficult situation because, again, some of them still have family in Cuba that are unable to get out. So,
yeah. Now, I know some of the proceeds from your novels go to homeless charities that you spent the better part of the last 30 years involved in homeless and poverty advocacy. So can you tell me about that and why you're so passionate about helping the homeless?
Are you ready for adventure? Are you ready to become location independent? Are you ready to create your ultimate dream lifestyle? Then I have just the thing for you. The Flip the Script Academy with me, Jessica Grace Coleman. My online academy, which is bursting with life-changing courses and resources, is for anyone who feels stuck in life, wants to make a change, would like more meaning and purpose in their life, wants to shake things up, especially after the pandemic, wants to start or grow a business or side hustle they can run from the road, wants to incorporate travel into their lives in all kinds of different ways, or is simply ready for an epic transformation. For more info, just head to traveltransformationcoach.com/academy. And now, back to the Travel Transformation Podcast.
well, it was something I just always felt led to do. And even as a teenager, I was helping homeless people. So it just always was something I did. And when I wrote the first book, again, I did it purely by accident. And it's about a homeless woman So I was never going to write more than one book because, again, it was an accident. And so I thought, I'll raise some money for charity and it'll be a good thing. So I continue to do that with all of my books, is to give money to charity. It's just one of my big heartfelt things, trying to get people some dignity in life and help them get into their first home, not end up on the streets in the first place. There's a lot of ways to help. And so that's something I continue to do. And now that I've written 4 books, I have a much bigger platform than when I was just a volunteer at a soup kitchen or a homeless shelter. And it's been really wonderful what I've been able to do with being an author. So.
Oh, I love that. I love how you've combined sort of 2 passions, helping the homeless and writing, and put them together. That's really, really cool. Okay, so I believe that if people sign up for your newsletter, they can get a free short story. So where can they go if they want to get this?
My website, which is LeighLincolnAuthor.com, and Leigh is spelled Leigh, author, LeighLincolnAuthor.com.
Great. And just before we go, what would you say is the biggest lesson or lessons you've learned either through travel or through writing your books?
I would think the biggest lesson is just be yourself no matter where you are, because you are unique, and just go live your life and make every moment count. And every life is precious and unique. And it doesn't matter whether you're traveling, whether you're writing, whether you're doing your job, whatever it is, just be you. So often we don't allow ourselves to be what makes us unique.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And like you said earlier, when you're traveling, you can become this completely different person as well that you never sort of knew was in there, which I always find interesting when you're traveling, going to new places, meeting new people and trying new things. So yeah, definitely agree with that. Okay, so you mentioned your website there, but is there anywhere else people can find and follow you online that you'd like to say?
You can find me on Facebook really easily, Leigh Lincoln Author. Just look up on Facebook. You can find my page. Frequently post there various weird pictures from various places around the world.
Great. And I'll put the links to your website and Facebook in the show notes as well. Well, that's it. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about your books. I'm going to have to go and check them out now. Yeah, thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Travel Transformation Podcast with me, Jessica Grace Coleman. If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate it if you could please subscribe, rate and review, and spread the word, because it's my mission to help as many people as possible to flip the script on their lives and transform through travel. And remember, life is short, so let's make sure it's nothing short of amazing. Until next time, I'll catch you on the flip side.